All right, welcome back to the Rise of American Imperialism overview lecture. This is part two. If you remember from part one, we were looking at the reasons why the American government began acting in an imperialistic way. And in this part of the lecture, we're going to look at the territories that the United States actually takes possession of and becomes an empire with. So, hope your notes are ready. Let's get started. If we take a minute with this map, we can see that the areas in orange are territories that are held by the United States. That is imperialism, when one nation politically, militarily, and economically controls another. And if you were a ship leaving the west coast of the United States, if you remember from the first lecture, how convenient that you can hop from island to island refueling in order to get to the east where all those wonderful luxury commodities, rice, silk, spices, tea, are located. All those good things that pulled Europeans out of Europe in the first place are still big commodities at this point in history. You'll also notice these green areas here in the Caribbean and Central America. This is where the United States has spheres of influence. Spheres of influence are not territories that are physically or politically held by another nation. But it does mean that one nation can place an extreme amount of pressure or control over another nation, hence the idea of influence, that one nation can really almost bully another to act the way it wants it to. And we're going to look a little bit later on at how the United States is doing that in Latin America. But let's spend some time looking at how we actually get our empire built by looking at the major territories. We'll start with the annexation of Hawaii. Hawaii, up until this point in history, is its own independent nation. It has a monarchy, and at this point we have Queen Liliuokalani on the throne. She is loved by her people, and she is working very hard to make sure that the American plantation owners that are there are treating the native Hawaiians correctly as they're working on their plantations. It's very hard work. If you think about what you know about cotton plantations in the South, very similar conditions. It's not actually slavery, but it's very close. The American planters that are there face several business issues. The first is that they have to export their product to the United States, and because it's coming from a different nation, they're facing various tariff issues within the United States. On top of that, they're a foreign business in the nation of Hawaii, and so they face tax issues that way. These business owners are very powerful, and they will work with the United States government to overthrow the queen. And in the end, the Marines will come in and actually forcibly remove her from her office. Even though the people loved her, they appreciated everything that she was doing for them, but American military might basically was the line that was drawn. And Hawaii will become annexed. It will not become a state until after World War II, but the territory will be considered American territory, and we will build the very famous Pearl Harbor Naval Station here on the big island of Oahu. And that will kind of be our first big acquisition in the Pacific. The rest of the empire will be gained through a series of events under the biggest event of the Spanish-American War. Spain at one point in history had a very large empire. Coming into the late 1800s, that empire has dwindled considerably. The territories that were held in South America have become independent mostly. And Spain holds now just a series of islands in the Caribbean, and this series of islands here, the Philippines in Southeast Asia. In both of these places, the people that live there are rebelling against Spanish control. They want to be independent, they want to have control over their resources. And the United States is watching this very closely because the United States has business interests there or sees that it could have business interests there. Both of these areas are resource rich, Philippines with rubber especially. There are numerous US businesses in Cuba, including sugar. And so as these rebellions are breaking out, the United States is going to watch and see and eventually join in the fighting itself, hence becoming the Spanish-American War. So let's look at the two areas where the fighting is going on. When we think about the Caribbean, we tend to focus on Cuba because that's really where the fire starts. The United States feels sentimental towards Cuba. They are the underdog. We have lots of American business interests there. And we also see it as a possible military gain. There is talk of building a canal through Central America, and if you could put a naval base there, there's a possibility that you would have greater control over a canal zone. And so the United States is watching as Spain sends in its military to try and put down this rebellion. Unfortunately, the military leadership that is sent into Cuba is not handling the situation very well. They're not treating the Cubans very well. They're not treating the Americans that are in Cuba very well. And all these incidences are being blown out of proportion by reporters that are in Cuba, American reporters in Cuba. You have these two competing newspapers run by two gentlemen, last names of Hearst and Pulitzer, and they're trying to sell more papers than the other guy. And so they tell their reporters, whatever you've got, you know, even if it's a scrap of truth, give it to me, send me a picture, I'll write the story. And so we get what's called yellow journalism because the paper that it was printed on was really cheap. And this yellow journalism really kind of stirs the pot and makes Americans feel sympathetic. The average Joes on the street are saying, wow, this is really bad. They're our neighbors. Shouldn't we be doing something? Shouldn't we be stepping in? And then we have the explosion of the USS Maine. This battleship had been sent to Cuba to protect Americans that were there and to act as an evacuation vehicle if things got really out of hand. That ship suffers an explosion and sinks, and there are many, many American sailors that are killed in the process. One investigation by Spain says it was internal, that something went wrong, it was an accident. The American investigation says, no, it was Spain. They don't like us being here and getting into their business. They purposely did that. The American public, which is already kind of whipped up into a frenzy, is now basically screaming for war. The president at the time, McKinley, feels kind of hesitant about the whole thing, but pressure from the public and the business interests that are there leads him to have Congress declare war, and so we will begin the Spanish-American War. On the other side of the globe, with Spain's territorial holdings, we send the Navy under Admiral Dewey to overcome the Spanish military presence that is there. Dewey will come into Manila Bay. He is aided by the leader of the Filipino rebellion, Emilio Aguinaldo, and they will capture the capital city, and that will basically end the Spanish control there effectively. It's seen as a great victory for the United States, but we are left with the issue of what do we do with this country that's half a world away? There are three options in front of the president. One, that the islands could go back to Spain, that we could say, well, you know, we beat you, but if you promise to let these people get what they want, you know, we'll stay out of your business. Well, we don't like that, and McKinley doesn't trust Spain to do what the Filipinos want. We could leave the Philippines independent, but they are in a position where other countries could come in and take them over. So not only would they not be independent, but someone else would have control of those resources. And remember, why are we acting imperialistically? Resources. So the third option is most appealing. That is annexing the territory just like we did with Hawaii. So McKinley will annex the Philippines, and it will be held by the United States along with all its resources for the next 50 plus years. The Filipinos are not okay with this. They had been under the impression that the United States was coming in to assist them in claiming their independence. When all is said and done and Spain, quote unquote, releases the Philippines to the United States, the Filipinos will continue resisting the United States military in order to gain independence. And that will be some very bitter fighting, as we'll see in our investigations in the coming week. So, at the end of 4 months, if you can believe it, 4 months, they called it a splendid little war. The United States has now established its territory, and we see that by our political cartoon here, right? Manila, so the Philippines, stretching all the way over to Puerto Rico. So what territory does the United States gain from Spain? Puerto Rico. It will be considered a possession. It's not a state, it's not a territory, it's in a weird legal area. We don't hold Cuba properly. It will not become a United States territory. It is an independent nation. But we will force them to write into their constitution what's called the Platt Amendment. This basically said that the United States could intervene, so come back into Cuba at any point if the United States government felt that it was not being ruled correctly. It also said that the United States was to be given territory for a naval base, and that is Guantanamo Bay, and we actually still hold that territory today. The Philippines come into U.S. control. We talked about that just a minute ago. And the Filipinos will continue to fight the United States until 1902. The rebellion will be put down. There will be some underground resistance. And again, the Philippines will be held by the United States until after World War II. And we gained some small territories in the Pacific, most notably Guam. Those of you who are World War II buffs are familiar with the significance of that island later on. So, at the end of the Spanish-American War, coming into the turn of the century, entering the 1900s, Uncle Sam is now at his leisure, right? According to this artist. He can have anything he wants off the menu. Cuba steak, Puerto Rico pig. And our waiter here, William McKinley, is just waiting to serve it right up to him. So now we have an American empire, and we're going to see after William McKinley in our next lecture, we'll have 3 presidents who are all going to take a very keen interest in Central America, and we're going to see how those spheres of influence come into play alongside our idea of American empire building.